Hi and welcome to issue 18 of the tutorial series of making airports with WET for X-Plane. We are talking about exclusion zones today. Our airport is nearing completion, I would say, and the thing I usually do last when I build an airport, or second to last after quality checking, is before quality checking, is placing exclusion zones. Now, what are exclusion zones? They are zones that exclude stuff, obviously. And to place them, you click on this little red X here, and then you see that up here is the little window says exclusions, and if you click on it, you get to choose between all these different things to exclude, and you can exclude just one or many or whichever ones you like here. And after you place an exclusion zone, you click on the top left and drag to the bottom right. A rectangle appears. It's called exclusion zone 1. And of course, you need to drag that into your airport project if it's not there already. And again, you can rename the exclusion zone to whatever you want, lock it, hide it, and of course, you can still change or batch change the properties down here. And before you guys ask, there's no way to turn an exclusion zone. They are always uh, north, south, west, east. You cannot, cannot turn them. You cannot make them into any other shape than a rectangle. And this is due to some limitations of how these exclusion zones are applied. Whenever you place an exclusion zone and put it into your scenery, then X-Plane looks at this exclusion zone during the scenery loading process. And obviously it excludes anything inside this rectangle that you specify over here. A little more on how that works in a second. But for now, that's enough. So if or once the simulator runs, the exclusion zone doesn't matter anymore because all the objects are loaded and it only affects loading time. So the more exclusion zones and the more complex your exclusion zones, the longer it takes to load X-Plane. And that's, of course, something to keep in mind. As with pretty much all the features that you place in a scenery, as many as needed and as few as possible. And this old rule applies to exclusion zones as well. Now you could just why do you place exclusion zones? Exclusion zones are primarily placed to exclude the autogen. That's the forests that appear, that the roads that appear, the buildings that appear, also beaches, power lines, railroads, stuff like that. You can exclude all that because sometimes it just, as we saw over here, we had some buildings infringing on our airport. We had roads that were there that we didn't like. And of course, it would be really simple to just make one big exclusion zone, put it over your airport, and exclude everything. And then you have a nice free area, and your airport sits in the middle of it and does not get disturbed by any of the autogen features. Of course, that would look silly because you know that airports aren't isolated like that. Sometimes they're really grown in by buildings, by cities, by forests, and we want to exclude again as much as needed, as little as possible. So the next thing that you would love to do, of course, is to draw a polygon that just about excludes everything that's outside of the airport fence. And as I said before, it doesn't work because those only come in rectangles. Now, one solution would be, of course, to make your rectangles like a mathematician would. If you approximate the area of a polygon, you fill it up with a million little rectangles, and the smaller your rectangles get, of course, you can duplicate them again and then place the next one. I can't hit Control Shift to duplicate here. I have to do it this way. But if you duplicate this one, drag it out, you could place the next one here and here and here and so on. You get the idea. But of course, then you would have a million of these little rectangles and loading your scenery would take longer than necessary. So again, what we try to do, or what I like to do, is I take my exclusion zones and I start out like a raster in a way. I start out here in the top. I make them maybe a little bigger, maybe like this, and the first one then goes over here, and then the next one I'm placing Again, usually I just copy and duplicate them and I move this over a little bit, and the next one goes over here, and so on. And then the next one would go over here. Make sure that you overlap always a little bit, or at least don't leave a gap, because then otherwise you may have a little tree here in between. And that way I cover my whole airport. And even if I don't observe any trees or buildings in the middle of my airport when I look at it in X-Plane, I still place these exclusion zones, because you never know what happens with the next version. Maybe the next version has some autogen buildings that are, for some odd reason, right here in the middle of your airport. And if your airport has these exclusion zones in place, it's future proofed against this sort of thing happening. So I like to do that. And I like to place two different types of exclusion zones. My first exclusion zone layer has everything except for the roads. The roads are special. I'll get to that in a second, but I'll do it like this. I have everything selected except for the roads, and this is what I use to pretty much exclude everything on my airport. I place these rectangles, sometimes varying the length. You can either go from top to bottom or left to right. It kind of like depends on the shape of your airport. If your airport is more like this north-south, then it is easier to go from north to the south. But if it's long like this, maybe if it's just east-west, maybe you just need like one stretched exclusion zone like that, and then you get away with that, and can keep it really simple. Now, for my roads, I tend to be a lot more careful, because as you said, as you saw when we ran this airport and X-Plane, we have lots of roads going here to the little terminal, around my the parking lots and everything. And we do want to retain as many of these roads as possible, but at the same time, some roads were actually in the way. And I don't have the simulator running right now, but if you click on OpenStreetMap and you load that up, you can see that, for example, there's a road, this one over here, and it goes all the way down here. But on the satellite picture, we saw that this is actually a taxiway. So obviously we don't want the road doubling here as the taxiway. This road is fine. This road we like, because it's, we allowed for it with our little polygons here that just attach kind of to this road. And we like to keep this one in place. So if we put a big rectangle over it, we lose all these roads, and we don't want that. So with the road exclusions, I tend to be more surgical. I do place road exclusions here over the bulk of my airport, especially these little access roads here that go to the ILS installation. Sometimes people tag them in OSM as roads erroneously, and then of course X-Plane tries to render roads. You will see that on bigger airports where you have service roads that go around the runway or even across the runway, and you'll see them rendered as default roads. That's not something that we want to keep in the scenery, so we need to exclude them. So again, to future-proof my airport, I place exclusion zones, but I make them a lot smaller, just to cover basically the runway and taxiway areas, being very careful not to hit any of these other roads or railroads that go around my airport, because obviously I don't want to cut them. And another word about the road exclusions. See, I would have to change this, of course, to road networks, and then deselect all these other ones to make these only pertain to, oops, not quite awake yet here, only make these exclusion zones pertain to roads. But again, I would place a few of those down my airport, being careful not to kill any of these roads or railroads or power lines. Power lines are also considered roads. They're networks that go around my airport. And when I get to the area of my terminals. I like to retain all the access roads. So this becomes a tedious work. Sometimes you have to load up the simulator. You have to check which road is there, which one you want to retain. And then if you don't want to keep a road, you kill it surgically. And let me explain that. Most of the exclusion zones, like these ones for forests, for example, they work like a knife. If you have a forest, um, see, this is a forest we placed. It's not affected by the exclusion zones. Exclusion zones never kill anything that is in your own airport. They only kill stuff that is underneath. But we saw there were big forests here around. So if you place an exclusion zone like this, you will see a rectangular cut of this forest right here. It's pretty much exactly along this line. It doesn't work for roads like this. If this was a road exclusion zone, so the road would not be cut off here and here, just missing the stretch in the middle. Roads are placed, and also railroads and power lines are placed by a grid network. And X-Plane looks at the OSM road. It sees this one. It says, okay, we want to make it simple, keep as few data points in our database as possible. This is a nice stretch of long road, so we'll make one data point here. They call it a node. The data point is here. Then the next one will go until it makes a turn, maybe right here. So this will be the next node. And then again, we can get away without making this a smooth line. We'll make one data point here, maybe one here, another one here. So all these roads, the road networks, the railroad networks are made up out of nodes that are connected like a spider web. And only the nodes are affected by your road exclusions. So sometimes you can place a road exclusion, and if you would place it like here, then this lower Moncure road would not be affected at all, because one node is probably here. This is a nice stretch. It goes all the way here. So there's no node inside your exclusion zone. So to kill this stretch, you would have to kill either this node down here. So we would have to take your exclusion zone down here to kill this one. Then with this node gone, this part of the road would be gone, but also this part of the road would be gone, because the node is gone and this part of the spider web collapses, so to say, only stretching from down south up to this node, and then from north maybe to this node over here. And this big chunk of lower Monkey Road is gone. And that's the drawback of the road exclusion zones. You are killing nodes. You have to hit the nodes. And if you don't hit the node, the road is not affected. But if you do hit the node, then both parts on either side of the node will get removed. And that's what's making it difficult. See, for this road, it's easy. I just want to kill this node over here, and then this whole stretch up to the next node, which would probably be here, is gone. And this is exactly what I wanted. We'll remove this stretch. But let's say I want to keep the road up to this edge over here, and I simply couldn't do it, because I have to kill roads in big chunks from node to node, and that's just the way it is. And if you do, but you say, I do want to have this road again, then you have to make it with a polygon, and maybe put a little yellow or white center line down it and kind of mimic the road with a polygon. But of course, you won't get any autogen cars going up and down the road. Now, a lot of guys like to just kill all the roads and make them all with polygons, because you can make the roads look exactly like they do on the real airport. And while I applaud this effort and think it's cool if you spend so much time on your airports, again, we do like to keep the roads intact, because who knows, a future version of X-Plane may have much better looking roads, cooler looking cars going down, and then your airport is there having your meticulously fashioned polygon road replacement, but there are no cars going on it, and it's just not what it could be. So in general, the consensus is to leave the roads, especially going up to the terminal, intact as much as possible, hoping for future improvement in the road network. And another thing that the road network has right now, you can see here, the roads go nicely around my little parking lot here, but as we saw when I ran the simulator in X-Plane, the roads cut from here maybe to over here, and they cut right through my parking lot, through these cars here, and that's what happens in the simplification process when X-Plane looks at the OpenStreetMap roads. It cannot really make them all true to life. It's making it more simple, cutting some corners sometime. Again, over here, if you have a road that goes around your airport, maybe in reality it goes around, but maybe in X-Plane it goes from here, cutting across straight over here. So if you place an exclusion zone and you just look at the satellite map or here the OpenStreetMap, you think, oh, I'm well away from my road, my exclusion zone is fine. But if you check and X-Plane, you can see that maybe by accident you killed just one of the nodes of your road system and taken away a big chunk of road going alongside your airport or across the approach area. So be careful with that. It's a lot of double checking, going back and forth between X-Plane and WED to really see what you're doing with your road exclusions. And another thing I'd like to mention is that when you exclude chunks of, let's switch back here to the Esri image. When you have buildings approach your airport, this is kind of a bad example. We have some little settlement over here, but X-Plane will place buildings on roads wherever it thinks it's fit. If you have buildings approach your airport or encroach or even go onto your airport, to remove them is again not working surgically as it is with the forests. You have to well, maybe this is not. Let's see, is there a settlement somewhere here in the vicinity that we can use as an example? Maybe over here. If you say this is good. If you have a section of roads, let's see this one here. It goes from this little circle here over here, then there's one up here and up here. Then the autogen inside this area is usually just made up out of one node in the middle, or it could even be a little off center somewhere. So if you say, I just want to kill these buildings here right on this road, these are fine, these I want to keep, I just want to kill these, it doesn't work. You have to exclude the whole block. So if you have an airport over here and you make the exclusion zone encompass these buildings, and then you run X-Plane, you'll see, hey, they're still there, but the exclusion zone is clearly over it. But what's going on? Well, you have to kill the node that is controlling the autogen inside this batch, inside this patch. Sometimes it can go across two roads or so. You have to experiment with that. Make it bigger until you see that you're hitting the node. But of course, you're excluding this whole section then. So if you just want to exclude these, again, just like with the roads, you have to make a choice, either the whole thing or nothing at all. And if you exclude the whole thing, then you can take some trees and fill them in here and put some buildings down to kind of rebuild what you just nuked. And again, that's just the way it is. You cannot surgically cut away objects. And of course, the houses are made out of objects and facades, so you probably have to use both to to really reliably kill the buildings that you are seeing. Now, one last thing before I let you loose on your airports to experiment with that is to know how exclusions work when it comes to layering. And if it's important in this context, there are many videos about the scenery packs ini, but everyone in his X-Plane custom scenery folder has a file called the scenery packs ini. And if you open it with any editor that you like, I'm using Notepad++, you'll see that you have lots of entries here for your scenery packs. And the way it works is that this determines the layering order of suppression and also of exclusion. So my airport that we are working on here is this one, the scenery KTTA Sanford Lee. And if I place an exclusion zone, it will exclude everything that is underneath, plus the global default autogen scenery, which is always underneath everything. So if someone else has an airport really close and it's above this one, it cannot get excluded by my exclusion zones. So sometimes people have like a scenery here that places trees all over the world, more accurate forests. So this is cool. But if this one is above your airport, then your airport cannot kill the trees with its exclusion zones because it's above. So layering your airports is important, and the way it should be is that all custom airports should be above, then the more global airports, and this is what we're building for. So if your airport ever gets accepted and added to X-Plane, it will exclude everything that is underneath here. And then the scenery packs with the global layers or more bigger layers, ortho scenery and everything, that should be underneath the custom airports. And if you add something to X-Plane for the first time, you download an airport and put it into your custom scenery folder, then it will automatically get placed way on top of everything else. Now, another thing is that your airport will exclude other airports with the same airport identifier. See, our airport identifier is KTTA. So if there's another KTTA, if you maybe downloaded one or so, then the other KTTA, if it is below in the scenery pack ini, will get excluded, including its exclusion zone. So let's say you're building a cool airport and it's excluding everything nicely, and then some other guy downloads a third-party KTTA and adds it on top. Suddenly, your airport gets suppressed, and also all your exclusion zones get suppressed. So this guy is probably surprised because suddenly he sees lots of trees that weren't there before, and maybe the other guy that made KTTA had your airport installed and says, well, there are no trees on this airport. This is cool. I don't need to add any exclusion zones. But now that as his airport suppresses your airport and also suppresses your exclusion zones, suddenly these trees appear because the exclusion zones are gone as well. So it's a little bit complex. That's just how it works. And when Julian checks your airport, he actually disables all the global airports. He puts this is a little trick. If you go underscore disabled and leave it like this, see, just like I did here with the HD global scenery, then now all your global airports will not display anymore. And when he checks your airport, he downloads it, he puts it on top of his scenery pack ini, and then don't forget to save when you do that. Then he can see how your airport looks on a vanilla installation of X-Plane without any nearby airports maybe affecting it. Could be that there's a little heliport somewhere over here on this this guy has a heliport, and the heliport in X-Plane has a big exclusion zone excluding everything. And Julian is checking our airport, and he says, oh, this is cool. There are no trees on it, but there are no trees on it not because we placed exclusion zones, but because this little heliport over here has a big exclusion zone that is already excluding stuff. And since it has a different identifier, it's not affected by our KTTA. And this would get an erroneous result. He would say this airport is cool. It has no trees on the runways. He approves it, and then on the next version, someone removes the airport. It's this little heliport over here. The exclusion zones it has are gone as well, and suddenly we have trees all over our airport. So when Julian checks your airport, he will disable all the global airports so that the results don't get tarnished. And this is rare that it happens, but it has happened before in denser area settings where there are heliports or airports close by each other. And this is also a cool way to disable a scenery if you just want to check something, then you don't have to literally remove it from your folder. You just add the disable. And of course, don't forget to undo it again, because sometimes people have disabled here and they're working on scenery and they're pulling out their hair because they can't see it. Lots of stuff has happened like that, where people, including me, got really confused by scenery layering order and what suppresses what. And usually it works really well. And usually it's the user who is at fault. Well, that's all I know about exclusion zones. You can certainly experiment with them yourself, and everyone has a little different technique. People will place lots of small exclusion zones or just big ones and rebuild the forests, just like we did over here. See, we rebuilt these forests already, so now we can place the exclusion zones and remove the forests that were here by default, and we still get a nice forest line that is true to real life around our airport. And we'll have to double check, and I will see that I remove the roads. If roads infringe on your objects like they do here. We remember we had this road in X-Plane that goes from here across these parked cars all the way over here. Well, then it's a matter of choice if you remove the road and keep your obviously true to life objects. But again, I lean towards removing the object, just leaving the bad default road in place, and then maybe you just you go to objects and you select this one, and you know this one is infringing on the road. So what I do is I'll look for it, it's here, and I make it invisible, keeping it, excuse me, in my file for the future. And when the next X-Plane comes out, I'll look at my airport, I double check, and then all I have to do is check which objects are invisible, and then I can re-enable them real easy without having to go through placing them all again. And then hopefully in a future version with better roads, this object is okay. And you'll have that a lot with buildings and so on, that you see the road cuts through your building, and you just move the building a little bit. It's no big deal. But I'll get to that in the second to next chapter, where we quality check our airport and go through that again. Okay, have fun. See you in the next video.